So let me welcome all of you, all the distinguished guests who've joined us today. We have a very, very eclectic panel for a discussion on COVID-19 future of work. We have Junaid Ahmad, who's the country director for World Bank. We have Mr. Sunil Munjal, the chairman of Hero Enterprise. We have Dev Jani, who's the president of NASSCOM. We have Manish Sabarwal, who's chairman of Team Lease. And we have Abhiraj Behel, who's representing truly the gig economy. He's the co-founder of Urban Company, earlier known as Urban Clap. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like all my panelists, because we are in the midst of one of the biggest disruptions we'll ever see in the world. And we are passing through some very turbulent times. The nature of work is changing. How we are working is evolving. Is this just going to be a blip? And are we going to get back to the old days, or are we going to see massive institutional changes in the days to come? I'll request each one of the panelists to give just a brief overview before we get into the main discussion. Junaid.
Thank you very much. Amitabh, I think change was already happening. If you just start off from the shock of climate change and how that has changed our economy worldwide. If you think back a decade back, we thought climate change would have a devastating impact in the developing countries. They would not be able to adjust. When you see India, that has now put in so much resources in creating renewable energy and shifting its nature of energy. So change has always been there. What the virus COVID-19 has done is it's created another shock and continued to put us in the path of change. And for me, it's the acceleration of that change is what I see. So no, I don't think we go back to the world that we see. We go forward in terms of continuing to adapt to new realities. I see a very different type of social protection system. I see a different type of health system. I see very different type of informal economy, which becomes the new normal, right? Informal becomes the new normal in terms of the way forward. So I see fundamental shifts in the way we work, but I see that also as part of the changes that have been happening. I see a very different NDMA, for example. An NDMA that only deals with physical natural shocks is of the past. A completely different type of NDMA is needed. So from my side, Amitabh, I think that this is a shock that continues to put us in a path of change, perhaps accelerated, but change for sure.
Thanks. Sunil, what about you? What's your perspective?
So I think it's in two parts. One, some human behavior will spring right back to what it was once things settle down. Will we go and see a football or cricket game 3 years out? I think we will. We will go to a stadium. We will probably also go to movie theaters. But the nature of jobs itself will change. The use of remote working, use of technology, use of communication will change many, many things and the way we do them today. So I think some changes are here to stay. But clearly, some of them will go back once people feel comfortable with the ability to move around, socialize, get back and meet with their friends and families. I do believe the accent and effort on public health will change, on preventive health will change, and we will also start looking at something to do with much more with gene therapy, etc., to be able to be both predictive and proactive with how we manage human health for individuals and for societies at large. Business itself is questioning itself as to what is the new model that it would like to follow once things get back to normal. How many people do you want boxed into an office? How much remote work is okay? How many do you want working on hours? And how many do you want only based on output? The ability to have a certain attitude and the ability to learn skill will become important qualities when you look at hiring new talent. So I do think we're going to see some changes which are here to stay, and some new ones which will develop during this period as well.
Debjani, your perspective, is it just a blip, or are we heading for major radical changes in the workplace?
If we don't use this opportunity to drive those radical changes, it's our loss. I mean, that's how I see it. I think this is an opportunity to completely reinvent how we do business. Today, Rajesh Gopinathan, CEO of TCS, made a very powerful statement. He said that we really don't need to be 100% back at work for productivity. We can be 25% back at work for productivity. And TCS has come out with a vision saying we're going to be 25 by 25, which means by 2025, we will only have 20% on campus and rest of them working at home. I think this is the beginning of a blended model. We talk about omni-channels. We're going to see that at the workplace. We're going to see a mix of offline and online coming together. So we are going to see a blended model, and that is there to stay. This is going to bring about a few changes. One, it's going to change workspaces forever. How we look at workspaces, how we design workspaces with social mandate norms, etc. It's going to change that. Two, it's going to give a huge boost to the gig economy. Because when you're working from home, you're going to realize you have far more opportunities to do more things. So this is going to give the gig economy a huge boost, and we will see how that plays out. Three, the one that I feel tremendously excited about, I think this is going to bring about that much needed balance in the workplace in terms of getting the other gender more involved. We've talked a lot about how women cannot come to work because of they have to stay at home, etc. This is going to allow women who want to work the opportunity to get back to work. And that should have a huge impact on work and economy. So these are some fundamental changes which I do not think is going away anytime soon. As an industry, we feel this is the time to absolutely leverage. Every crisis throws up a good opportunity, and leverage completely reinvent our business model.
Okay, thank you. Manish, your perspective, please.
I think I'd unpack the short term and the long term. The short term is absolutely unmodelable. You know, everything we are doing to murder the virus is murdering the economy. And whether the recovery is V-shaped, U-shaped, bathtub-shaped really matters for us because, you know, companies are not, we are rivers, we are not ponds or oceans. I mean, shareholders and banks don't pay salaries, customers do. And if customers are on strike, I think the short term is really murky. But in the long term, I think there are huge interesting implications, right? Employees will start evaluating employers for resilience as much as performance. I think in the last few years, we've forgotten that, you know, you have to survive in order to succeed. And so the amount of debt, the amount of diversification, the stupidity of shareholders writing checks to customers. So I think resilience will become an evaluation for employers as much as performance. In the past, we didn't care. Second is this work from home. I'm a little, it has provided continuity. We'll see whether it provides productivity, right? I mean, it's exposed a class system for sure. 70% of my graduates can work from home, but only 10% of my non-graduates can work from home. And even CEOs are thinking about whether productivity is there. You know, Andrew Carnegie was once asked, how many people work at US Steel? He said about half. You know, that's probably what many CEOs are saying for work from home right now. I know there's lots of nice storytelling going about work from home, but if many people are honest, they should apply for leave. So I think that yes, 10%, 5% will be fine, but we're not going to work from home. I think the global mandatory crash course in digitization, which has happened, is really going to change the world. India could go from 1 billion payments a month to 1 billion payments a day. You know, online learning has been brought from 2030 to 2020 in 1 month. And of course, I think that just how organizations think of themselves. You know, we were already moving to concentric circles of different kinds of people, permanent employees, temp, contract, gig economy, consultants. So the concentric circles will accelerate. Also, I think the pyramid, I mean, our pyramid had become a cylinder in high tide. It has to go back to being an Eiffel Tower. So how organizations structure their people supply chains, how they structure their people will really change. But I think the fundamental change for employers and employees is we will have to think about resilience as much as performance.
Okay, thanks. And Abhiraj, your your vision of how the gig economy will drive this change?
Amitabh, I think there will be, sort of from my vantage point, three changes that will happen. One is, unfortunately, the world over, a lot of people, like in any recession, will get unemployed. And many of them will look towards informal work, will look towards the gig economy to sustain themselves over the next couple of years, and eventually that will become their new normal. And I think a lot of employees will realize that, as Manish said, organizations are not necessarily as resilient as they sound to be. And therefore, I think you'll find a lot more people who actually don't formally work for an employer. They work for themselves and they're part of the larger informal or gig economy. I think that's one change that is bound to accelerate. I think the other thing that is likely to happen is that the workplaces might end up becoming a lot more global. And what I mean by that is, historically, it's been low productive ITES, and back office process work that has gotten outsourced. What we will tend to see is that lot more high quality work, lot more product oriented work also starts to get outsourced to emerging markets. I think as far as formal workplaces are concerned, I'm honestly itching to get back to work. There's a point beyond which you can't work from home, and it's as much about productivity as it's also about camaraderie, as it's about workmanship, team building. And you want to be surrounded by a certain amount of energy, which only being co-located offers. So I think formal work locations, I'm less bullish that they will move to a omni-channel kind of model. I see that will eventually spring back to a full work from office model.
Okay, thanks. Sunil, I wanted to turn to you because my view is that supply chains will get massively disrupted. We are also in the midst of Industrial Revolution 4.0, and therefore, what are its implications for the manufacturing world, and what are the opportunities it opens up for India?
So I want to pick up on what Abhiraj said and also Manish said. I think we are seeing a new era of what I would like to call globalization. India has a unique opportunity today to take a bigger play in the supply chain of the world, because China has begun to worry many countries, and many global companies have developed what they call a 1+1 strategy. They want to continue China, but they want to hedge their risk and go to another country as well. India is well positioned. If we handle this crisis well, the current crisis, as we are doing, by the way, today we are rated as one of the better managers of this crisis worldwide. I think we have a good chance of attracting more capital, attracting more talent, and attracting more ideas and technology into the country in the manufacturing sector to take on a bigger role, not just for indigenization alone, but for becoming a bigger global player in the manufacturing field, a lot bigger than we have been over the last 30 years. So it is a unique opportunity, and we need to repurpose ourselves in some extent to be able to do that. Are we doing enough right now? I don't think so. But are we becoming aware of the challenges? Absolutely right now.
Okay. Junaid, I wanted to ask you that how do you think this will impact developing countries? What are its implications for emerging markets vis-a-vis the developed world? And does that open up many opportunities for the emerging world?
So let me just have one reaction. I am not worried about the private sector, and I'm not worried about technology changes and innovations. I think there is huge power in the private sector to innovate. I think the key question that I would say we're facing is, does this shock tell the state that the state has to change in the way it governs? To me, if the state does not change in the way it governs, then all the opportunities that may emerge is going to not really meet the expectation. I look, for example, in the climate change shock, India moved very fast on getting renewable energy at its top objective, but has done nothing on the discoms. The discoms continue to be the Achilles heel of the energy system. So today, if we're going to see a completely new type of work arrangement, new type of private sector emerging, the question is, where is the state and how does the state work? Is the state's social protection system going to change? Is the state, in terms of its federalism, going to change? Is the state going to change in terms of what it continues to be a public sector? I think those questions will determine the answer to your question, which is what will developing countries do? For me, if the developing countries don't change the nature of their state, you're not going to be able to capture the benefits that I think emerges from these kind of shocks. How does research happen? Fundamentally, if you look at the health sector, how has India's health sector changed? Right? There seems to be two parallel systems, a public sector system and a private sector system, but they're not linked to capture the benefit. Right? Ayushman Bharat was created to bring the two together. Right? Can we move further in that arena? I think if the state changes in the way it works, then the idea that globalization will be localization is absolutely possible. I look at Kerala and the way Kerala has responded. It's because it's a very different nature of the state and community relationship that has allowed Kerala to take on the COVID virus. So for me, the big question is, where do we see the state in the next 2 to 3 years? That I think will determine the future.
Okay, so Manish, what Junaid is talking about is some major structural reforms in India's economy, because we have to grow with jobs, and this requires some critical thinking to drive reforms. You've been writing about some of these areas. You know that we have the cheapest mobile data, we have high penetration of digital devices, we have an English-speaking workforce. What more do we need to do?
See, I think the virus has shown us that pre-existing conditions are a real problem. And India's pre-existing conditions is we are much less formalized, much less urbanized, much less financialized, and our human capital is weak. So we need, essentially, our labor is handicapped without capital, and our capital is handicapped without labor. So I think we need a dose of labor reform. You can't comply with 100% of India's labor laws without violating 10% of them. You need a dose of education reform. I mean, it's the Ayatollahs of education, UGC, has made sure that only 30 universities out of 800 can offer online learning in this crisis. I mean, US universities have signed up 200,000 students in India in the last 1 month. So what sense does that make? Social security reform. Provident Fund is the world's most expensive government security mutual fund. ESI is India's most expensive health insurance program. I think financial sector reform, credit to GDP ratio of 50%. I mean, we should be at 100%, at least OECD rates. If China's 300% may be the wrong number. And then fundamentally, as Junaid referred to, it's sort of government reform, right? I mean, 20 million, I know there are only 4,700 IAS officers, but there are 20 million civil servants in this country. And we do too much. We should do less so we can do more in education, in healthcare. We don't need 58 ministries. I mean, Japan only has 8. US has 14. UK has 21. So I think fundamental structural reforms so the government can do what it needs to do without sort of in today's expectation, it has been exposed, or at least the virus, that a country with $2,000 per capita income can't do what Germany with $60,000. So the only way to help people is to have the resources, and that will need us to unleash the regulatory cholesterol which is holding us back.
So you said UGC, you said about medical council in many ways. What are the other institutions where we need a radical overhaul?
I think just basically the where the rubber meets the road, right? There are 57,000 compliances, 3,100 filings, and this changes 8 times a day. we have a website where you can keep track of the 8 changes every day. I know people keep saying I'm making this up, but it's live. And big companies like us who have 150 guys in regulatory affairs can handle this. But everybody loves MSMEs, but they don't recognize that out of 63 million enterprises in India, only 1 million pay social security. Only 19,500 have a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. 98% of our employers are less than 10 employees. So this notion that an employer is Tata, Birla, HDFC or Infosys is delusional, because when you tell companies to pay salaries and not do anything when customers are on strike, I think you're talking about Tata's, Birla's, Infosys and HDFC, but you're ignoring 62 million enterprises. And these big enterprises anyway are not the future, right? I mean, the average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company when the first list came out in 1955 was 64. Now the average life expectancy of Fortune 500 company is 14. So the Indian state just makes life miserable for entrepreneurs in peacetime. And hopefully this policy window in wartime has exposed that we want to help all Indian citizens, and the only way to do that is to have more productive, formal enterprises with access to credit and high human capital. And I don't think Indians have a cultural problem. It wasn't God's will that it should take 72 years for 1.3 billion Indians to cross the GDP of 66 million goofy Britishers. It was regulatory cholesterol, and we need to be unleashed. And please use this opportunity to do that.
Okay, thanks. Debjani, about skilling and how do we skill our people for new kinds of jobs, because we are heading into a totally new world, and we need completely new courses. Our IITs, our engineering institutions, our educational institutions, they're all outdated with their curriculum. So how do we do the curriculum restructuring and bring in completely new courses for the world of tomorrow?
So, on this one, Mr. Kant, and thanks again for the tremendous support that you gave us when we started this initiative, actually more than a year back. India had a little bit of an advantage because we had started the work. It was called the Future Skills Initiative that all of us undertook. We had started the work to think through what is needed to change the basic curriculum, skilling, and even the way of learning, because that has to go through change too, in order to get us ready. And we got tremendous support from the government. We got to not only build the content, but build the platform. We have over 30, 50 members of the industry involved in doing this. And now it's about rolling it out. We are getting tremendous traction from universities, especially the one thing that happened is post the crisis, the universities come back on steroids saying we want to be part of this. How do we take this curriculum and how do we take these training models to our students? Blended learning has taken on a completely new meaning. And we are seeing a lot more focus on online learning, not just at the school levels, but higher education, where it's really needed. We're seeing so much focus on blended learning in these places. So I think on skilling, thankfully, as a country, we had started thinking about it more than a year back. And this is really paying off because today we have the curriculum, we have the courses, we have methods to reach the and get it out there. What is now needed, and what we are beginning to see that happening, especially in the last few weeks post the crisis, is the universities earlier were a little distant. They weren't sure if this is the way to go. They still wanted to follow their own methods. What we are seeing is the industries come together, the universities come together and say, we want to join hands. How do we make it happen? And that's exactly what we have to do.
Okay. Abhiraj, I just wanted you to dwell a little bit on how many people do you employ, and how do we make you grow 10x, and how do we create another 100 odd urban claps in different metros of India? What are the challenges?
At this point of time, Amitabh, we have close to 30,000 gig workers who are not our employees, but they pretty much work with urban company. I think I'd speak more generally for the e-commerce sector. I think it's important that the sector, as Manish said, continues to flourish with minimal, government and regulatory cholesterol, as he termed it. I can use an example. Even in this pandemic, when it's amply clear to everybody that e-commerce is one way to continue commerce lines to flourish with maximum social distancing, most companies have to go through the e-pass and pass approval system, and almost plead with local authorities for passes to continue their delivery and service operations. I think somewhere, there has to be. I think this larger pandemic is an opportunity for us to shift gears as a country. Sometimes these things aren't possible in regular times, and say, can we once and for all accept the way forward as capitalism and private sector, and make some wide sweeping reforms, and move to a model which is, you know, less government involvement in businesses. I think that will help by and large, not just e-commerce but most sectors. And then I would leave it to the private sector to figure out who are, let the best players evolve and let the best innovations scale up.
If I can just add to Abhiraj, I'll be a little bit more maybe blunt here in terms of what's needed. I think we should give the SMEs and startups a complete break from all legislative process for at least the next 2 years. They need that. They need that to recover. The one thing the government can do immediately, that is right now, is ensure that every pending due to the smaller companies, to the SMEs and startups is paid up. There's so much, and we are collecting the amounts, but there's so much of amount that's due to them in just refunds, GST, tax, etc. So it's so important to ensure that we take that first step and do that. And third, I think there's a critical which we've been asking for a very long time. The government has to buy from this sector. We've been paying lip service to that for a very long time. I know you've been championing it, but when it comes to government departments, the bureaucracy comes in the way. We just have to take a step top down to say we are going to buy from this sector. The government is going to buy from this sector. It's going to be critical to the growth of new age companies, product companies, etc. in India. So those would be big asks, Mr. Kant.
So three things you said. One is do away with all regulatory procedures for the next 2 to 3 years. You said all pending dues must be cleared. And thirdly, the government should place orders with the startup and MSMEs. Okay. Sunil, I wanted to ask you from a viewpoint of the private sector that in the midst of this, huge accelerated change, what are the kind of changes which the corporate world itself will have to undertake to become far more leaner, far more thinner, far more efficient? If it has to capture the global markets, what kind of changes does the corporate world will have to undertake?
So I want to take this in three parts, Amitabh. It's not corporate world working in isolation. Take the first part that Junaid was talking about, the social compact. Second one, which is being referred to right now. And the third, what the companies used to do internally for themselves. Because please remember, no company is an island. All of them work in an structure around them, which allows them to function or otherwise. So I think the first thing that the companies themselves are now questioning is their current structure, which includes their cost structure, their operating structure, their reporting mechanism. They are already beginning to question that because of what they saw in the crisis. Nobody was prepared. People talk of preparing for a black swan event. I think nobody was prepared for this kind of an event. So this is making people sit up and take notice and think that the next time something like this occurs, am I going to be better prepared? So people are doing a plan. Now, I know for a fact 8 or 10 companies that I've spoken with who are asking this question of themselves. So they're saying, let's make better use of technology to get better information data on ourselves and our entire universe, which is our customers, the customer behavior, our suppliers, and their universe as well. So that's the one thing companies are doing. And many, many companies are looking at much more flexible work environment. And despite what Manish said, there are many companies saying, can I have only a few people on my fixed roles? Can I have many more contractual workers? can I have many more who do not take up space and other overheads of work? So that's the one kind of initiative going on. Second, we already spoke about earlier on how Indian companies want to play a bigger role on the global landscape. And this will have to be done. No large company works in by itself. Every large company needs a host of mid-sized and small companies to work with them, because the large companies are able to provide strategic direction, branding, distribution, logistics, whereas it's the small enterprises which will make up the manufacturing, the jobs, the exports, and all of that. And it's a combination of these which works well. So the ability of learning, unlearning, and reskilling is one more thing which is coming to question, and which goes back to our education system, which we are referring to right now. To answer one of your earlier questions, what do we need to change? Our entire regulatory setup that we have at this moment is seen as a policeman. It's not seen as a facilitator. It's actually not seen as a regulator. It literally is being seen as a policeman in many, many cases. And in too many cases, they are making decisions with appears to be biased towards some parts of the industry or a player within the system. So I do think we need to take a step back and review the whole thing and how we look at people. Is India right for a minimum basic income? I think it is at this moment. For people who cannot earn that basic income, need to be supported. You can call it anything you like, and call it social security, call it a minimum income. There are many ways to cut this, but that has to be done as a humanitarian requirement for us. And then look at how to use that mass of humanity to become our actual asset for the country. All of them have some skill. We are forgetting the largest employer in this country are handicrafts, are the artisanal skills which are getting lost because they're no longer contemporary. They have not contemporized the product, skills, designs. We need to connect them to the mainstream markets. And this move from rural to urban will continue. So urbanization, which looks like a threat, is also one of our biggest opportunities. That's another thing companies have started to look at.
Yeah. No, great. And I wanted to also compliment you for this great work that you've done for craftsmen and with reference to your Goa festival, etc. That's really bringing Indian craftsmen and Indian skills center stage. Manish, then vast number of questions coming in, but before I turn to them, I wanted to ask you on vocationalization of education. What more do we need to do? That's number one. And how do we drive more digital payments in today's world? How do we become a champion of digital payments?
I mean, I think the vocationalization of higher education is only held back by the regulatory sort of ayatollahs. I think that kids, parents, employers have already moved to recognize that 60% of taxi drivers in Korea have a college degree, 31% of Walmart checkout clerks in the US have a college degree, and 15% of high-end security guards have a college degree. But the social signaling value of college still matters. So I would say the degree, allowing the degree linkage, allowing multimodal delivery, and frankly, we have banned online degree-linked apprenticeships. I mean, India only has 5 lakh apprentices. That's 0.01% of our labor force. If we had the same as Germany, so all we need to do is this regulatory cholesterol around capping apprenticeships and capping. See, there's some flick of pen reforms and they are capacity reforms. You know more than me. The lowest hanging flick of pen reform in education is lifting the cap on apprenticeships and lifting the ban on online learning. So once you lift the ban on online learning, you will create a degree linkage to vocationalization. I don't think everybody needs a degree, but it's above my pay grade to keep fighting, about the social signaling value of degree. And frankly, in our own behavior, vocational training is usually for other people's children. It's not for our children. So my sense is if you remove the cap on apprentices, if you allow degree linkage to vocational training, which means a 3-month certificate can be an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, as an opening balance for a 2-year advanced diploma, as an advance for a 3-year degree. So I think that the vocationalization of higher education is ready. Parents are ready, kids are ready, employers are ready. Just remove these bans blanket on apprenticeships, degree connectivity, multimodal delivery, and online, and we will get there. I think digital payments, the key, it's really at a cusp of where we're ready to go. And the most important one would be is the government digitize all its payments. I think that, e-Kuber is offered free, yet we pay 6,000 crores a year in bank agency commission to states or central governments or PSUs who refuse to do digital payments. If the government just digitized its own payment, you would take digital volumes by 100%. And I frankly think they will be up 300-400%. So whether the decision on the MDR has to be made, whether the decision on government payments to be made. But my sense is, the Federal Reserve got a letter from Google a few months ago saying that please copy India's UPI and architecture. That must have been an unfamiliar feeling for them. So we should celebrate that. But there are 5 different changes, which if India makes, we'll go from 1 billion a month to 1 billion a day.
Okay, thanks. A large number of questions coming in, and I first wanted to turn to Abhiraj because that's the question from HN Shipra. And she asks, how will gig workers survive with minimal pay and no social security?
I think it's a great question, and it's something that we at Urban Company have been pondering over. I can first speak about what we've done at Urban Company, and then talk more broadly about how the industry should think about it. At Urban Company, we had quickly put in place a few mechanisms to respond to the pandemic and help our gig workers. First and foremost, we had started to give out 0% interest loans to them, no questions asked, with very delayed moratorium periods, so that the next 2 to 3 months they have money in the bank to survive. With the view that only when business activity recovers do you have to pay back these loans, and absolutely no interest whatsoever. The second thing that we had done was we had put in place a COVID-19 health insurance and income protection plan in case any of them fell ill to COVID-19. And this was also free of cost over and above existing health, life, and accidental insurance plans that they already have through the company, free of cost. And the third thing was we put in place a relief fund, which employees and other well-wishers contributed to help the most impacted gig workers. Now, some of these were individual efforts that we as a company took, but the broader question is, at some stage, I think both government and private sector has to think about, for the gig workers, how do we continue to let them flourish independently as freelancers, but they have some form of a social security? Can we, for example, help them contribute to the national pension scheme through the gig platforms? Can they all be made a part of the Bima Yojana or the Ayushman Bharat through the gig platform? Can they start contributing a small amount of money for a rainy day, like 500 rupees a month, which over 3 years effectively adds up to, with interest, about 25,000? That can be coming in very handy to survive such tough times. I think these are structural changes which most gift platforms haven't thought about in a deep fashion because they haven't faced a crisis like COVID-19. But they will have to think about it, as will the government.
Okay. Junaid, there's one question from Mamta, and she asks that how do we integrate this opportunity of work from home? How do we integrate youths from rural areas? Because they are the ones who need jobs, and how can we encourage infrastructure and work opportunities in tier 3 cities and beyond?
I think that's a brilliant question because it captures what I think are two very fundamental changes that are happening in India. One is urbanization, and the other is, of course, the youth of India. But just before I answer that, I have to just piggyback on the previous question and what Abhiraj said. I think today is the time for India to completely revolutionize its social protection system. You have the PDS, you have bank account Jan Dhan based on unique ID. You have some of the most amazing programs on the gas cylinders, the Prime Minister's program. I think these have to be brought together in a platform that becomes the social protection system of the future, which will provide the protection to the informal workers. It'll provide portability for migrant workers. It is time that India just shift its scale on social protection. It is already doing it. It's capable of doing it. Returning to the question, I think that what we are going to see is that urban management has got to change. I think if urban management changes, then the nature of how cities invest will change. And that is going to be a major source of jobs and major source of jobs for youth coming in. Cities are the place where the informal economy thrives at its best. And that's where the youth are moving into. So I think the whole notion of how you manage cities, how you create opportunities for the informal economy, and how you create a social protection system underpinning that informal economy becomes very, very important for youth employment. It also links to the previous question on vocational training and change of education, because I think India will have to continue its path of allowing students to go into school, come out of school for vocational training, go back to school again, to create much greater flexibility in the movement between schooling, training, and market activities. That, I think, is going to be a very important platform for the youth coming up.
Thanks. Sunil, there's a question from Dr. S.N. Sridhar of Amity University. And he's asking, and I'm turning to you because you run a university yourself, please give us some more insights into the type of education that is expected in future.
So, as you know, we set up a university 5 years ago, Amitabh, and you've been there. Set it up in my father's name for a specific reason. We wanted to condense his life learning into an actual education curriculum. And we looked at the best practices around the world. We said, let's make the most practical learning curriculum that's possible. We've now been rated the most innovative university in India. And we are told by experts from places like MIT and the University of Chicago and others that we have the highest experiential learning curriculum in the world. And this is also a highly research-oriented university. So I think in the new age learning, plus, as Debjani said, we were already experimenting with all kinds of stuff from day one, like flipped classroom. It's a place which is, I think, in some sense, designed for the future of education. So what we have said is the classes need to be used only for discussions, workshops, conferences, seminars. The ability of students today to just download content is immense, much more than it's ever been in history. So that's all possible to do. So if you give them hands-on learning experience, so we focused on things like the longest practice school in the world, which is the time students spend with companies working or with NGOs working with them or with law firms, etc. We've also focused on impact on society. We set it up on what we call 3I principle. One is innovation, and second is sense of inquiry, constantly questioning, how can I do this better? And the third is making a positive impact on society in everything that you do. So we try and underpin any and every activity of the university on one or more of these three principles.
Okay, thanks. Manish, there's a question from Brainlight Skills and another one from Akash Naran. What will be the future of skill development, and how can the private sector play a role in making labor skilled and more inclusive?
I think the future, learning and knowing, right? In a world where Google knows everything, knowing is useless. It's, learning how to learn. So it's clearly that, learning how to learn is the future of education. Soft skills matter more than hard skills. I think the degree linkage for social signaling value, only 30% in my estimate actually will complete the degree, but 100% want the ability to conclude the degree. So linking to universities is important. I think treating apprenticeships rather than classrooms. So the fundamental way, I really believe that apprenticeships, which is learning by earning, learning by doing, are the future of education. Whether it's the flipped classroom that Sunil mentioned, whether it is the signaling value of apprenticeships has become much higher than degrees for some reason, and that's the nature of the beast. So I think the private sector can really contribute in terms of its ability to create employer linkages, to use digital technology. The fundamental challenge for the private sector is we have a market failure and skill development. See, employers are not willing to pay for training or candidates, they're willing to pay for trained candidates. Candidates are not willing to pay for training, they're willing to pay for a job. Banks or microfinance aren't willing to lend to a candidate unless a job is guaranteed. And therefore, training companies are unable to fill up their classrooms. So I would say the future, we have done a lot of innovation in delivery in the last 4 years or 5 years in skills. But the next wave of innovation is needed in skill financing. Who pays? I mean, right now everybody's trying to topi now the other person, right? Government wants employer to pay, employer wants parents to pay, and kids want parents to pay, and it's not working.
Okay. Junaid, this will be probably the last question. Then whole lot of questions coming in from Santosh Gupta, Anup Kumar Satpathy, Jaya Chandran, Charu Malhotra, many questions. But one question which Santosh has asked, and how Santosh Gupta has asked, how do you see the focus around efforts towards sustainability and climate change in post-COVID era? Both corporations and countries will be struggling with revenues, and therefore their focus will not be on climate change. Junaid, I'm turning to you.
I think I have to really borrow what Manish said. You're going to see a shift in the way we look at resilience and how we model resilience, whether at the firm level, at the individual level, or at the state level. And I think that in this context, there's going to be even more effort to understand sustainability. A lot of what we're beginning to learn is that the way we treat our natural resources is coming back to hit us. Ironically, that as COVID hit us, the air got cleaner, the rivers got cleaner, and it's a sort of a signaling that how we manage natural and the resources on which we base our economy is going to matter. So I believe that you are going to find that the role of even more emphasis on managing climate change, managing resilience, are going to be, dovetail very strongly. I think it's important. One of the lessons, at least I'm learning, is state is back in a big way. United States, the fiscal stimulus is close to 10% of GDP. In Japan, it's close to 19% of GDP. State is back, and everyone recognizes that without the state, it would be impossible to deal with the risks that we face as a society and as an economy. But that puts a great onus on the relationship between the state and its citizens and the nature of the state to change. In that context, I think the state signaling that it is behind resilience, it is behind climate change, is going to be what I think will be the driving force going forward. But there is no doubt the state is back, and there's a need to rethink the way state. The biggest lessons coming out of this COVID crisis.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. We've had a very fascinating discussion. I think really great insights from all the participants. I just wanted to ask you the last question. Each one of you can reply with a one-liner. How do you think India can better leverage to adopt to this future of work? And I start with you, Abhiraj. You're the youngest in the panel, so with you.
I'll keep it short. I think we have to focus on manufacturing, and there should be a two-pronged approach. We should welcome the top 500 manufacturing outfits globally to come and set up shop in India in the 1+1 model that Sunil spoke about. And at the district level, every district magistrate should become the champion and the facilitator to quickly help ramp up the manufacturing units that are there in his or her district, as opposed to being a policeman. That should be the key KPI for the district manager.
Thank you. Devjani.
Yeah, I'll speak it from with the tech lens. I think we need to really reprioritize and look at a segmented approach of the tech portfolio. you'll have sectors going down, tremendously down, like travel, etc., over the next few years. We are going to see a lot more focus on the use of technology for security, education, etc., etc. And I think India has to place its bets. We have to look at some of these areas and say, how do we quickly become the best in these areas? It's absolutely possible. What is needed? What policy changes are needed? What skilling is needed? Sort of put the entire different pieces of the puzzles together to figure out, do we get an edge in some of these areas, rather than trying a holistic approach to say we want to be the best in tech. I think this is the time to prioritize, to look at it as segments and figure out which segments do you want to play, which will make the maximum difference, and how you be the best in those segments.
Okay. Manish.
I think there is this old racist quip, right? India doesn't change for a better option. She changes when you have no option. I mean, hopefully we can use this crisis to do the reforms that we've known for a long time. You know, if you really release land, labor, capital markets and how they combine, we'll have millions more entrepreneurs like Abhiraj. And I don't think any amount of fiscal deficit or monetary policy or, CSR can substitute for 500 million people getting salaries or self-employment. It's just delusional to believe. I know the big state is back, but it's delusional to believe the big state can pay for itself.
Thank you. Sunil.
I think we need to apply a differentiated thinking now to how we look at economics. How we look at consumer and job patterns in light of what we've seen now, and how we look at the relationship between the home, office, and factory. That relationship is going to change. We also need to approach a new changed trade paradigm, which is clear, and I'm talking of global trade here now. India, along with the rest of Asia, needs to play a much more proactive role, as Abhiraj mentioned, in manufacturing. And in terms of using the resources that we built an amazing set of resources with the India Stack, with the JAM Trinity, the whole host of systems that we've set up in the last few years. We now need to encash that and build on top of that intelligently, while dismantling part of the excessive bureaucracy and over-regulation. We need to allow more open operation, but keeping in mind that the system is required. As a backstop, the system is required. But other than the backstop, it needs to be a facilitator and nothing more than that.
Okay. Junaid, the last word to you on how can India better leverage to adopt for the future of work?
First, there's a mea culpa that's very important. I think that it is time that Bretton Woods systems relook at how they function globally, and I think that India has a big voice in making that shift happen. But in terms of India, I believe that the future of India lies in the states of India. Competitive federalism is what's going to change fundamentally what India offers to its citizens and to the world.
Thank you. So thanks to all my panelists for this really wonderful and very riveting discussion. COVID-19 has created a very, very unique challenge for the world, particularly for India. And I think we are all grappling with a very complex, very unpredictable, very, very dynamic situation. And I think today's discussion has really helped us, all of us, all the viewers, all the listeners today, to get a better perspective, a much better understanding, a far greater comprehensive perspective of what India needs to do really to create a better future of work for India and for Indians. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, and Amitabh, compliments to you to keep bringing up such useful